G'day guys, and today we've got to talk about the Australian economy, specifically a new law that has been proposed to be put into place next year, so starting January 1st. And essentially what it is the Australian government wants to ban cash payments over $10,000 for merchants, so businesses and that sort of thing. Now in Australia, I don't know about your nation, there is a lot of work done in the economy, essentially like a black economy, whereas people work for cash, the income is not reported, and everyone gets off tax-free, and that's happy days for everyone involved. Now, according to government projections, there's $50 billion in lost tax revenue that the government misses out on. So obviously they're very butthurt about this, and they want to get their feed because politicians cannot keep their heads out of the trough. They love messing around with other people's money. I'm sure there's a lot of pensions to pay with this, a lot of welfare for overseas immigrants, and essentially a lot of money to launder for the politicians. So they really want to get their hands on this $50 billion. So just reading from the government's own website, under this measure, there will be a limit of $10,000 for cash payments made to businesses for goods and services, whether by individuals or other businesses. The measure will not apply to individual transactions, which is consistent with the task force recommendation. The government's response noted that the measure was aimed at reducing money laundering and tax evasion. It also noted that the government would consult on implementation of the limit. So it's not going to apply for individuals. So if you are going to sell a car and you sell it for 12 grand, you're not going to get arrested for that sort of thing. But if a business attempts to buy, say, a car for itself and it uses $10,000 of cash, well, $10,001 of cash, you can get in big trouble with that. And I've seen fines of $25,000 and jail sentences of 2 years, proposed punishments for this sort of thing. Now, they haven't said how they're going to implement this limit, so how they're essentially going to spy on people and know what they're up to, but assumedly they'd be monitoring the economy using the surveillance state apparatus to keep an eye on, who's buying what, maybe not on an individual level, but certainly as a sort of macro look at the industry. Is this industry going well at the moment? Are they buying a lot of stuff? Well, if they're buying a lot of stuff, let's have a look at their reported tax incomes and let's audit them and see what they're buying and see if we can find a discrepancy, and then we could start hammering people that way. As of course Australia does have a very sophisticated and far-reaching surveillance state apparatus. We are part of the Five Eyes spying network. There's no other way to put it. Australia loves to spy on its own citizens, as we've seen with some leaks, and I've talked about that before. You can check out my video on those leaks. So, research published by the Reserve Bank of Australia in July 2017 showed that cash accounted for 18% of total merchant transactions by value. This fell to 11% for payments of $501 or more. So essentially, for those bigger payments which the government is targeting, potentially 11% of that is going unreported in terms of tax. Now, of course, some people don't want to fall foul of the government, and even though they're going to make cash payments, they are going to report that to the government because they're very afraid of being locked in a cell, essentially, or being, resisting arrest, then being shot. So 11% of the economy, or 11% of transactions by merchants, is obviously a big slice of the pie that the government wants to get its hand into. And as I've said before, they can't get their heads out of the trough. So cash was also disproportionately used by those in the lowest income quartile. Hey, that's me. This accounted for 44% of payments by number, compared with 37% for all other quartiles. Now this indicates something pretty obvious to me. So what this says to me is that those with a lot of cash are probably working a lot of cash work, or cashies in the Australian slang. So what this essentially means is, as we'll get into, is that if the government is going to attempt to hamper the cash black economy, it's going to harm those lower income earners like myself. Not that I work cashies at the moment. Not that I ever admit to working cashies either. Keep it very mysterious. So what essentially can end up happening is if the government goes quite strong arm and really tries to crack down on this cash economy, well then the poorest quartile are going to have less money and keep the poor so they have to rely on the government for help. It's all part of the operative strategy. I do not believe the government wants people to stop being poor. That's a fantasy. They love people being poor because they have to rely on the government. So as I mentioned, the report goes into the risks of cash use. So placing a dollar value limit on cash payments for goods and services not only limits the opportunities to underreport income, charge lower prices, and underpay GST, but it also signals to the community that using cash for tax avoidance is not acceptable. Now, sometimes, occasionally in the world, you'll encounter someone and just in the first thing that they do, I should say, you can know everything you need to know about them. And that's exactly what this sentence is like. So, they want to limit the opportunities to underreport income. And of course, they use very family-friendly passive language. It would be a little bit on the nose if they said, we don't want people to have their own money. We want people to report all the money they earn so we can take it off them as much as possible. We also don't want businesses to charge lower prices, which is really, really strange that they would even admit that, even in this not closed document, this publicly available document, but not something that's going to get on the news, not something that most people are going to see, because unfortunately it requires a little bit of effort. But that's where I come in. Of course, I'm happy to go spend my time reporting important information to people and underpaying GST, which ties back into the first point. So obviously they want as much money from the people as possible. They want to take it by force, and they also don't want businesses to charge lower prices. So they want people to have less money by tax and less money because businesses have to charge more. That's pretty interesting. When the government talks about, we want to create a strong economy and we want people to have more money, but we also want to take a lot of money off you and make you pay more for things. It's pretty interesting. Again, sometimes all you need to know about someone is the first words out of their mouth. And also signals to the community that using cash for tax avoidance is not acceptable. Now, that's a very passive way of saying we want to scare people into compliance. But obviously they're not going to say that because it's a bit too on the nose. But that's exactly what they want to do. So you don't need to catch all the criminals. You just need to catch some and use them to scare the shit out of everyone else. So I thought I would also mention that several other nations have limits on cash payments. Australia is not unique in this, nor is it the first. And so they'll just be up on screen right now. You can take a look and cry if you're in one of them because you're being oppressed. So obviously, if you're going to have an expansion in government power, you need some sort of excuse for this. And if we have the Minister for Housing and Assistant Treasurer Michael Secure, well, he provides the excuse. He says the government was, quote, committed to continually ensuring our financial system is hardened against criminals and terrorists without placing undue burden on industry. So there's this old joke that essentially if the government wants to increase its own power, it either appeals to patriotism or it makes you think of the children, and this is exactly what it is. Obviously, if you came out and it's all about programming people. So if you come out and say, "Hey, I don't support this," people obviously go, "Hey, you just want to support criminals and terrorists, man? What the hell? This is about stopping criminals and terrorists." It's like, no, it's not at all. It's about placing strain on the economy by not allowing businesses to pay people in cash, which is, some people's income mostly comes from cash. At one point in my life, most of my income was coming from a cash job, and I wouldn't have been able to earn as much money if the government was getting its fingers involved as it is now, and that would have made me poorer. So, as I mentioned before, the government does not care if you're poor. That means you're more reliant on the government. It allows it to expand its own power. It's a snowball effect. So yes, the line taken up by the government at the moment is think of the children. I also think it's pretty funny that they were mentioning not placing undue burden on industry. It always blows my mind when politicians talk about this whilst at the same time enforcing tax, because if you look at the company tax rate in Australia, it currently stands at 30%, or only 27.5% if your aggregated turnover is less than 25 million. So they want to, not place too much strain on the economy, but they also take a third of your income if you run a company. It just doesn't make any sense, and even a little bit of digging will reveal the contradictory nature of this propaganda, which is how you know it's really shitty propaganda. And unfortunately, the government doesn't need to deliver really good propaganda because they know a lot of people won't look into this sort of stuff. But again, you don't want to place undue burden on industry, and yet you take 1/3 of their income. Very interesting. I wonder if it ever occurred to anyone in the government to ask just the simple question of why. Why is the black economy of cash in Australia so prevalent? Why is, 18% of merchant transactions, why are they taking place in cash? Why are so many people using cash? Why are people doing this? The answer may be that you're taking 1/3 of people's income, and that's not a there's no tax-free threshold as well. If your company earns $1, if you're under really hard times and you earn $1, the government will take 30 cents. So, it's no wonder to me that businesses may be willing to offer cash payments in order to avoid a 30% tax rate, but maybe that just didn't occur to anyone in the government. I'm sure it did. They just don't care. They just want to get their hands in people's money as much as possible. So yes, another increase in the Australian government's power that will probably circulate in the news for a few days, not really looked into that hard, and then flushed down the memory hole. Everyone will forget about it, and then we'll be less able to make money, which is a terrible thing because, if this lower quartile income, which includes me, is kept down and kept poor, and it's harder for them to get ahead, then the government can continue to blame the free market for their problems and wealth inequality, despite the fact that they're taking all this income off them, if they can at all, especially these businesses as well. The government will help keep you poor, blame it on the free market, and use that as an excuse to increase government power. It's all about keeping people poor, keeping them on the teat of the government, and essentially making people depend on the government to perpetuate it into eternity. So obviously we need to do something about this. The most important thing I've always advocated for is just talking about it. It's super easy to make a YouTube video, make a Bitchute video, make a post on Gab, let people know. Information is the key. I know Senator Fraser Anning posted up a post on this on his Facebook page with some instructions of what people can do. They can email, I think, the government and let them know they don't support this system, get some grassroots support going and that sort of thing. I would encourage all Australian citizens to do this. Unfortunately, this ban on cash transactions for businesses does represent another step of Australia heading towards a more UK-style totalitarian system. Let's not mince words here. This is increasing government power. It brings us closer to totalitarianism. And unfortunately, unlike the United States, Australia does not have a constitution of negative rights imposing limitations on the government. We don't have a right to free speech. We don't have a right to defend ourselves. There's not a whole lot we can do when the government decides to be tyrannical. Nevertheless, I will never discount the power of speech. It doesn't matter if I'm not allowed to say it. I will keep saying whatever I want, whenever I want, wherever I want. The ISPs are still blocking Bitchute, but I have my magical ways around that because I'm younger than 65, and I'm going to keep doing what I do. I'm going to keep bringing information to you, the people, because we all have to live in this country. We all have to live under the government, and it's a ethical abomination, essentially. So, yeah, thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.